looking at a market that's going to be fixated on the Federal Reserve this week. I want you to take a peek at stocks. They're concerned that this is the week the Federal Reserve hikes rates or doesn't hike rates. In other words, no matter what the Fed does, the market's going to interpret it negatively. I want you to take a look at a 30-year Treasury bond. I had a 10-year Treasury note, 10-year more to the point. 30-year under 3%. We've got very little movement. Yield on now at 10 years at around 2.18%. So interest rates are already very, very low. But here's something that just got the market worried, even though it's very good news for Apple. Pre-orders for this new 6S off the charts, we're told. In fact, they think it will set a pace higher than the original 6. So that means that there's obviously built up consumer demand, a busy consumer sentiment that's building for more buying. And so, well, we have room to hike interest rates. We've got David Stockman here because he's been following this better than anyone I know and worrying about it more than anyone I know. And the trouble David sees with those candidates on the right and the left, no one seems to be worried about the underpinnings that don't look good, like that nearly $19 trillion in debt that is ballooning. Mr. Stockman, our special guest for the opening segment. Good to see you.
Glad to be here.
You know, you were right. I was thinking of you, not Donald Trump, not any of the premier candidates, much talking about that time bomb.
Yeah, and it is the time bomb, and it's the heart of the issue. I'm talking about the Fed and the upcoming decision. I'm arguing that the jig is up. 80 months of ZIRP, zero interest rates, is crazy enough. It's time for the Fed to stop its wretched jihad against the savers and retirees of America.
And do what?
And allow the market to find an interest rate that makes sense. There are savers out there, millions. There are borrowers out there, millions. Let them figure out the right rate, not 12 people sitting on the federal FOMC.
You're not a fan of the Federal Reserve, but the market controls the market rates, right? And the market seems to have surmised that inflation isn't a problem. Rates don't need to go higher. What do you say?
Zero interest rates are crazy under any circumstances, regardless of inflation, because it says the cost of money for 7 years running is free. That can't be true. The market is not setting interest rates.
So you don't believe the litmus test they use, Dave, like 2% inflation, whatever it is, you get near that, above that, keep pace with jobs with that, you've got problems?
No, the 2% is totally a made-up target that conveniently allows them to shovel free money into Wall Street. It never does get to Main Street. The whole idea of zero interest rates is to get, consumers and households all jiggy and get them borrowing and spending. But that doesn't work anymore because we're at peak debt. Households have $13 trillion of debt. 90% of households are tapped out. They can't borrow regardless of the interest rate. Same with
So if you start raising it, doesn't that make that situation even worse?
Well, it's fair to savers. We can't solve this economy by picking sides at the Fed between savers and borrowers and say we're going to keep it at zero for borrowers forever.
Well, you're not saying that the Federal Reserve should be at the behest of savers or debtors, right?
It shouldn't be. It should be neutral, and it shouldn't be intruding in such massive way into the financial market.
Okay, so you bring all these issues up all the time, and God bless you, you're way ahead of politicians who don't, and they don't for good reason. They talk in the aggregate about, oh, we got to address entitlements, but they really don't spell out the details, and that worries you.
Yes. Right. See, one of the evils of zero interest rates, of this massive monetization of the debt, remember, in the last 6.5 years, the Fed has purchased $3.5 trillion of government debt and basically funded it out of thin air by hitting, the send button on its computers. Now, what that has done is made interest rates so cheap that the politicians in Washington think they can kick the can indefinitely because even $19 trillion of national debt practically today doesn't cost very much to carry. The $19 trillion today, because the Fed is so manipulated and suppressed the interest rate, costs less than the $6 trillion that we had at the turn of the decade. So therefore, what they're doing...
Because interest rates are so much lower.
Because the interest rates are so much lower. So what they're doing is creating a false financial market a false signal, not only to Wall Street gamblers who borrow money for free and just keep buying and bidding and gambling, but to the gamblers in Washington who think we can just let the entitlements run, not worry about the fact that Social Security is within.
But even Donald Trump does that. He's Mr. In Your Face, no unspoken thought. You'd think on this he'd leap and say, my friends, we got a real big old problem here, but he avoids it.
Well, actually, the Fed's money printing has been good to Donald Trump over the last 30 years. Why has real estate boomed in New York and throughout the country? Because debt has been so cheap that developers and investors...
Who are the candidates impresses you the most when it comes to at least recognizing this problem?
You know, it's really sad to say there's a debate of 17 of them coming up, and not one of them is focused on the true evil in the system, which is a rogue central bank that's destroying free market capitalism.
Well, leaving that aside, I mean, I think Rand Paul's been a little critical of the Federal Reserve.
Rand Paul did a good job of addressing that.
Right, but Chris Christie has talked separately about Social Security, that soon you might have to means test it, raise the retirement age, that sort of thing.
Okay,
those guys are about the closest I can think.
I agree with you. There have been little dribs and drabs here and there. But until you get to the heart of the matter that we're going bankrupt fiscally, and we have to address that now, not down the road, that interest rates eventually are going to normalize. You can't have free money forever.
I hear that a lot, Dave. But what is normalized? I mean, 0% now, what should normalized rates?
Well, I mean, historically, interest rates have been from 2 to 4% above the inflation rate. The inflation rate today is manipulated by the BLS in Washington. It's easily 2%.
So we should be looking at overnight bank lending rate of about 6%.
Yeah, overnight rate should be somewhere in the 3 to 6% range.
Can you imagine what that would do to the debt?
It would cause a lot of consternation, but also it would stop the gambling. Why do we have $59 trillion of debt on our economy, public, private?
You're talking about all unfunded liabilities.
No, not the unfunded liabilities. Actually, the debt outstanding of households, businesses, government.
Combining it all. Okay.
It is a staggering number, okay? It compares to $10 trillion 2 decades ago.
So how would you deal with it? Last time you were here, you would say, we have to raise taxes, we have to cut spending at the same time.
We have to do that in Washington. We have to allow the free market to set the price of financial assets, whether it's money or long-term debt or equities or anything in between. And until we get back to those principles, let the market decide the price of things and let Washington implement fiscal responsibility, I think we're just drifting towards a greater and greater crisis.